Uh, Good day, everyone. I'm a chair for digital government. There's small change. I know the session was supposed to be chaired by Prof. Tendani Mawela. It's unfortunate she's not able to be with us. I'm taking over from her. I know time is against us, and some of us we are already thinking of lunch. I'll try to limit the number of questions that we are getting from this session. The good thing I'm only having two speakers. The first speaker is Prof. Nixon Muganda Ochara. I've met her long back while I was just doing my master's. He asked me uncomfortable questions, but the good thing, he was sharing so much knowledge that it helped me in my academic career. Prof, over to you.
Good afternoon, colleagues. Good afternoon, participants. I am waiting for the presentation to be reflected. Great. Thank you very much. As you've heard, my name is Nixon Muganda Ochara. I am from the VETS Business School. I work under the chair of digital business. This paper that you see in front of you is a conceptual paper. Sometimes when you are approaching a certain age, you start writing things in which you reflect on life and ask many things about related to why. This is the reason why I started looking at this paper. It also emerged from conversations relating to a course that I'm teaching on systems thinking. And so that's why we have the paper titled Understanding Digital Economy Dilemmas using Systems Thinking. I want to touch on those three areas. The idea of systemic digital economic dilemmas, systems thinking and complexity, as well as touch on how to align the digital economy dilemmas that we face now to systems thinking. Now, you have heard since morning that there are many, many question marks related to these dilemmas that we face. And I think the proposal that we're putting here is we probably need a different way of thinking for us to address these dilemmas that face us, whether it is AI or whatever it is that is facing our society currently. And so this is part of the motivation for this paper. That first slide simply captures the idea of digital economy. And if you see on the far right of the diagram, you see the emphasis on things such as an algorithmic economy, precision agriculture. We talk about Industry 4.0. Those are concepts that are becoming more and more our daily lingua, right? So it shows that we are transitioning and that really the economy is moving more and more towards that digital economy that we talk so much about. So we are becoming more and more digitalized. And as we have heard from earlier speakers, there are dilemmas that then emerge with our transition to such an economy. Right? Now, I'm just going to give probably one or two so that in terms of how these dilemmas are currently exhibiting themselves in reality. So if you think about one of the issues that we face is interconnectivity. I mean, it is a concern that we have always had for many, many years. I mean, we thought we should have solved the digital divide problem more than 3 decades ago. We are still talking about it up to now. How come the problems are not going away? Is it because the way we look at things or what? Why are we still talking about the digital divide problem and many, many other problems that face us? And yet we thought that as we advanced in terms of use of technology, these problems will be solved. And there are other problems that are coming up. I mean, yes, we are moving into the digital economy. We are also talking about other concepts coming up, such as the sharing economy, right? We have Uber with us. We have Airbnb, and there are many others that are linked to the sharing economy. Now, some have characterized some of these things, like the sharing economy is a share the scraps economy. We know, for instance, that when Uber came in many of such platforms, lives were affected. The traditional taxi business was affected. Did we think about the impact that such a transition is going to have? And you've had the previous speaker mention some of these things. And there are also question marks whether some of it is a real economy. I mean, those who are engaging in this sharing economy, are they really earning real wealth or peanuts? That's why we talk about share the scraps economy. Many businesses have been affected, whether we talk about hotels because of Airbnb or even the traditional taxi business. I mean, you've seen across the entire globe, when Uber was being introduced in some countries, there were riots in order to protect the traditional business. In countries such as France, they had to play around with the legislation to introduce a clause that, for Uber to operate in France, they will have to delay releasing their drivers for 15 minutes so that the traditional taxi can have a chance to compete if the customer can see that Uber is late by 15 minutes. So it was a reaction to that model of business, right? So we see a lot of these dilemmas. They are good, they are bad. It's the nature of innovation, right? We see this even in terms of how digital transformation is unfolding in different parts of the world. We still don't know how to actually approach the process, digital transformation. And probably it is the nature of innovations that we learn and adapt as we roll them out. So if you talk about digital transformation, it depends on who you are talking to. If you're talking to somebody from a Western-oriented form of thinking, they're most likely going to talk about digital democracy, and the approaches that they then sort of propose is based on that worldview that they have. And so you see this in a number of these systemic dilemmas. There is none that we can say that this is completely good, this is completely bad. And even as we talk about smart systems, again, we talk about smart cities, and we eventually have to be able to think about, as we come up with those smart concepts, those smart ideas, smart mobility, a smart environment, we are talking about smart homes. Have we thought about, who is going to be making decisions on our behalf, or what is going to be our role as human beings in such a smart environment? So this is the point that I'm trying to emphasize, that we are faced with systemic dilemmas as we move into this, digital economy arena. And we may need to approach things in a different way, particularly taking into account opportunities afforded by systems thinking. Now, part of the reason why I was highlighting these systemic dilemmas is that we are now faced with a much more complex world, a much more complex system, much more complex economy. And systems thinking has a different, particular view of how to approach complexity. If we can see that these problems or these dilemmas are actually complex. So I will go into the idea of systems thinking. I will avoid boring you with the history. But I will mention one or two ideas related to the slide that is in front of you, which provides the evolution of systems thinking. Now, the key milestone that we need to consider is that in the 1930s to the 1940s, we came to the realization that how we approach things was not adequate in understanding the problems that face us, because how we are approaching things was much more reductionist in approach or much more analytical in approach. And when I talk about analytical, I think the people in this room are very aware of what analytical thinking is all about. It stems from even your training in education, whether it is engineering, whether it is in computing, there is a lot of focus on analytical thinking. And the emphasis is in analytical thinking is on how things work, and is mostly internally oriented from that historical perspective. Now, so in the 1940s, just to give a brief why it emerged, many thinkers then realized that we did not understand our role in the world. We needed to understand our role in the world. And for you to understand your role in the world, you need to understand the environment that is facing you. And so people started to explore. By the way, in the 1940s, majority of people had not gone beyond 6 miles from where they were born. And they died without going beyond 6 miles. You may be knowing some people who have not gone beyond 6 miles, isn't it? Even now, in the villages, or the rural areas, etc. All right, so as people started moving beyond their boundaries, they started meeting other people, maybe of a different color, a different speech, a different culture. So we started asking questions. Why are they different from us? We thought we are the same. We thought we are the only special people. But as you start moving out, in other words, moving beyond the internal environment, starting to look at what is the external environment all about that I need to understand and adapt to. So the thinking has been started in the 1940s, and one notable publication was by von Bartalanffy, who came up with wrote a book about the general systems theory. And some of our disciplines have adopted systems based on such early thought related to systems thinking. Now, currently, we are sitting at a stage of systems thinking which has been enriched by a number of ideas over time. But the critical one that you see on the far right is what we now refer to as critical systems thinking, which exploded with the publication of a book by Peter Senge and Churchman in early 1990s. And so we saw the adoption of systems thinking then. Now, the approach to systems thinking. So systems thinking then starts looking at how do we look at complexity beyond only the way we think analytically, the way we are trained in our schools, etc. So there's a specific way in which systems thinking approaches complexity. And what I've shown on that slide, which is related to requirements engineering, shows how, as we design things, we can really misunderstand what the purpose of the design is, depending on who you are talking to. If you're talking to the systems analyst, they will give you a different view. And they may report a different view to whoever is designing the system. They may not even have gotten the actual picture of what the customer really wanted. So that the slide you see under requirements engineering shows that during the design process, there's likely to be a misunderstanding of what problem we are actually solving. And so from a systems perspective, a problem is considered to have different perspectives. It's not just one perspective. And for you to understand any problem, you therefore need to be aware of what are these perspectives of systems thinking that can allow you to see different aspects of the problem. All right. So this is the emphasis that I want to bring out here. And I can ask you a simple question. Is there anybody who has seen his or her back? Or how often do you look at your back? Sometimes you need somebody to see it for you, right? A mirror, yes, but it doesn't show it exactly the way you want it. Yeah. So the idea behind these different perspectives from a systems thinking perspective is that a problem may have different perspectives. And sometimes we tend to focus, for instance, on the technical aspect of it and think that we have solved the problem. And it is rarely so. When we do that, we still end up with unintended consequences that we then have to deal with. So in the world, we keep on having problems that we need to figure out how to solve. And probably it is good. Maybe it gives us a reason why we exist in the first place. Because I do believe if you don't have problems, there's no need for existing. We need to have problems that we solve every day. We need to change our environment every day. And so the role of the human being as a thinker is to be able to adapt to the environment. And this requires a different way of thinking. So the grid that you see on the far left shows the view of systems thinking in terms of how to address complexity. You see that on the left side. On the left side where you have systems, and then at the top of that grid you have stakeholders. That from a systems thinking perspective, there are those problems that are considered to be simple from a systems perspective. Simple problems simply imply that you understand what are the cause and effect relationships in terms of the components of that system. So an aeroplane, therefore, is a very simple system from a systems thinking perspective, because before an engineer actually designs or builds the aeroplane, they must know the nature of the relationship between all the components. So the technical designs or engineered designs from a systems perspective are therefore considered to be a simple system. It doesn't mean they're not complicated. Before you build them, you must understand what is the cause and effect relationship. I can see you are wanting me to walk off. So let me move on to something else. How many minutes? It's over. 2 minutes. Okay, so what you see in this box is a summary of the different perspectives that are used in systems thinking to understand different aspects of the problem. I'm just going to just highlight, if I point here, will you see, or there? I'm just going to focus on, for instance, the viable systems model. It basically assumes from a stakeholder perspective, like the way we run organizations. Within the organization, it is assumed that everybody is in agreement in terms of this is the vision, mission, and objectives of the organization. So the stakeholders have sort of agreed, this is our mission, on Earth. For instance, Google's mission is to organize the world's data to be meaningful. They have not achieved it, but that is their mission. Now, after coming with that mission, you need to build a vehicle for realizing that mission. And so the viable systems model focuses on organizational complexity. How do you design organizations or diagnose problems in organizations? And that is its only focus. So it has been used to design organizations as well as to find problems in organizations, because it only focuses on organizational complexity, which we think is one of the major problems that you find in organizations today. Now, if you take an example of SD or systems dynamics, it basically makes the assumption that what you see today, it didn't just happen today. So we should not be surprised. We should not be surprised that we have AI, whether in research or in many other places. the reason we are seeing it now is based on what happened in the past. So systems dynamics then uses the history of the behavior of any system to understand what we are currently seeing in order to predict how it can happen in the future. And you see, such ideas being implemented, for instance, in machine learning, where you're looking at historical data to understand the behavior of a system and use that historical data to provide predictions in the future. I mean, that's the basis of system dynamics. You're still using basically the behavior of the past to understand where we are now in order to predict the future. So each of the different systems approaches focus on different aspects of any problematical situation. And so they understand, in order to understand complexity or any complex problem, we need to recognize that there are different aspects of the problem that may require different solutions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prof, for challenging us to think beyond our solutions. It is quite interesting when you say we need to think beyond that, especially with digital economy. It opened markets, especially for the hotels. Now it's easy to get an accommodation in those rural areas because of all the platforms which are currently in place. Therefore, now, colleagues, I'm open for 2 questions. Any 2 questions? Anyone who wants to pose a question? Okay. Thanks, Prof. It seems like everyone. Oh, here is one, Prof. Wallace.
Yeah, so my question is actually, how do you define a dilemma? When you say it's dilemmas, how do you define what a dilemma is? Why didn't you go for other concepts instead of dilemmas
Okay.
as a concept? Yeah.
How do you define a dilemma? So a dilemma is any situation where there are likely to be more than one way of solving that problem. So for instance, if you talk about, I mean, in the world today, we talk about sustainable development goals. There are many, many goals that we have set out, and if you ask anybody who is looking at them, how do we actually realize those goals? You rarely get one answer. So a dilemma is basically any situation, any problematical situation where there's likely to be more than one option of solving that problem, and that problem cannot be solved using the same thinking that created the problem in the first place. So that's why we need a different way of thinking in order to solve any dilemma which has contrasting answers or can be approached from different perspectives. Yeah.
Thanks, Prof. Chara. I'm interested in understanding, you talk about, but whatever systems exist because there's a status quo which is interested in them existing.
Sure.
So from a systems perspective, how do we go beyond the status quo, which will make sure things stay the way they are and fight to the death if necessary?
Hopefully not to the death, but for instance, one of the approaches to addressing what you've just described are situations where there are entrenched interests and therefore there is power play there. In systems thinking, there's an approach called critical systems heuristics, which basically focuses on how to address those situations where there are vested interests in situations. And we normally have those. Take the example of Uber. I don't want to use Eskom. Let me just use Uber for now. Now, with the introduction of Uber, you can see that it affected certain segments of the population. And many segments of the population rose up to challenge their thinking. For instance, the trade unions had to rise to challenge their thinking. Now, as human beings, we know that we normally fight, for instance, oppression. Now, if you talk about the concept of critical systems heuristics, it actually arose by people challenging, those systems that were put in place but disadvantaged some segments of the population. And as human beings, we always do that. If we feel that we are challenged, our life is challenged, we devise ways of how to oppose or correct, such situations, whether it was colonialism or slavery, the issues of vested interests, and those aspects were challenged. We still challenge some of those things, whether it is in organizations where there is discrimination in terms of pay amongst the different genders. There is still, you see a lot of research, gender research coming out to challenge those systems that are actually disadvantaging certain segments of the population. So there are some systems that there are techniques for addressing those, but we still don't have approaches for addressing dictatorship. No, we don't. Thank you.